Beneath our feet and o'er our head is equal warning given. Beneath us lie the silent dead. Above us is the heaven. Roger Hebert. Welcome to Montreal Street Signs. Named after the Governor-General of Canada, Dorchester Boulevard was inaugurated in 1844. In 1987, it had its name changed between Delormier and Atwater Streets in honor of the premier and founder of the Parti Québécois, Rene Levesque. It was for a century referred to as the Street of Royalty for all its British landmarks, but today it's known as the Street of Skyscrapers for its abundance of cloud-stirring towers. Of the tallest buildings in Montreal, half of them are on Rene Levesque. These include the CIBC Tower with its horizontal strips of glass curtain alternating with green slate from Wales, the IBM Marathon Tower, a building with two faces, granite walls and square windows facing west, curved glass facing east. Arguably the most distinctive building in Montreal, Place Ville-Marie, took root in 1962. Nicknamed the Cruciform Building because it's shaped like a cross, this great spike forms the nexus of Montreal's underground city, the largest in the world. At the time of construction, the tower was the third tallest outside of the U.S. Architecturally, the most radical aspect of the accomplishment was the fact almost half of the 280,000 square meter complex was beneath street level, with the obvious benefit of being protected from Montreal's extreme winter and summer climates. Speaking of tall buildings, in this town, the sky is not the limit. Mount Royal is. It was Place Ville-Marie which provoked the introduction of a uniquely Montreal bylaw. No building in town can exceed the height of the mountain at 205 meters. When it opened in 1878, the Windsor was considered Canada's first grand hotel. Major railway executives lived here, making the Windsor probably the commercial center of the entire country. Now, no offense to Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto, but it ain't bragging if it's true. Sarah Bernhardt, Rudyard Kipling, and Mark Twain were among its early guests before a 1906 fire destroyed 100 rooms. Rebuilt and expanded, in 1917, owners of the Montreal Wanderers, Quebec Bulldogs, Montreal Canadiens, and Ottawa Senators met in the hotel's restaurant and didn't emerge until they had formed the NHL. Ending its life as a hotel in 1981, patrons of its bars and restaurants can still enjoy the ornate plaster ceilings and Austrian crystal chandeliers of a more romantic time. Want to hear the best-kept secret of World War II? When German forces threatened their shores in 1940, the wealth of England was transported across the ocean to Canada. It was all hidden right here in the lower chambers of the Sun Life building. Swords and scepters and crowns? Maybe not, but one wicked pot of gold, I assure you. Founded in 1871, the Sun Life building began its life as these 7 stories on the south side. With the tower added in 1931, it became the largest building in the British Empire, with an area of 963,000 square feet. Originally, the word basilica referred to an architectural style, but that all changed in the 18th century. Now, basilica in the Catholic Church means that a church itself has been elevated to a very special status, and the only person who can do that is the Pope. Montreal has 4 basilicas: Notre Dame, St. Joseph, Mary Queen of the World, and St. Patrick's. 2 of these basilicas are right here on Rene Levesque Boulevard. St. Patrick's Cathedral is near and dear to my heart because it has historical ties to the Irish community. The first Mass held here was on, guess when? St. Patrick's Day, 1847, making this church the oldest English-speaking Catholic church in Montreal. Members of my family have been attending services here since 1850. The interior is white oak, marble, and rosette-stained windows, all heavily ornamented with Irish shamrocks and French fleur-de-lis. The church is known for its St. Patrick's chimes, referring to its 10 bells. Keep in mind, back in the day, church bells were individually crafted and no two were alike. The oldest here, named Charlotte, was crafted in 1774. Pew 240 still has D'Arcy McGee's nameplate on it. The eloquent Irish-born father of Confederation became Canada's first political assassination. Back in the 20th century, the Maine divided Montreal linguistically. But in the 1800s, the street that separated English from French, Catholic from Protestant, was right here, Dorchester. There exists a century's worth of French ingenuity to the south and a highlight reel of English establishment to the north. Even today, the first French and first English prime ministers face each other across the divide. Laurier looking down toward the shores of Cartier, Champlain, and Maisonneuve, and Macdonald toward the mountain of Van Horn, McGill, and Molson. Sometimes history is burned, like Canada's first Parliament buildings. Sometimes it's demolished, and the very dust you see floating in the Montreal air might once have been a church, hospital, or hotel. But sometimes history is buried, like that lot across the street, for instance. Place du Canada is boarded up because an excavation is taking place. This is providing a challenge because the plaza was once St. Antoine's Cemetery, the final resting place of Catholics in Montreal. Planting new trees will require the exhumation of some 200 bodies. That means when the plaza opens again to the public, there will still be 38,000 bodies left in the ground. For 2,000 years, Catholics were buried facing east so they could watch Jesus rise again with the sun. The Vatican didn't lift its ban on cremation until 1963. They told him Italian national troops were threatening Rome and there was nothing he could do about it. He said, "Oh, really?" and organized a papal Canadian regiment of 507 troops and sent them overseas. They told him building a 1/5 scale replica of St. Peter's in Rome was physically impossible, and he said, "Is that right?" And he had plans drawn up. And they told him building a Catholic church in the English Protestant district of Montreal was a foolish undertaking. And he said, "You don't know me very well, do you?" So whatever happened to the provocative Ignace Bourget, Bishop of Montreal for almost half the 19th century? Well, they built a statue to him, right here in front of his masterpiece, Mary, Queen of the World. Inside, you will find Bourget's magnificent tomb and the tombs of dozens of other bishops, altogether a celebration of Italian marble, bronze, red copper, and gold leaf. Outside, the cathedral is lined with statues of saints donated by 13 Montreal parishes who didn't want to see the project fail. Each statue is the namesake of the contributing church, including St. Joseph, St. Francis, and St. Hyacinth. Time to stump a random stranger. Excuse me. Hi, we're discussing religion today, and Montreal's known as the city of 1,000 bells because of all our churches. Now, if I told you there were over 1,000 basilicas in the world, do you think you could name for me the very first one ever given that distinction?
St. Nicholas Basilica in Italy in the year 1783.
Yeah, okay, smart guy. Streets get their names for various reasons: historical, geographical, fantastical. Can you tell me what the cities of Budapest and Warsaw have in common?
They both have streets named Winnie the Pooh.
Scariest streets in the world to go trick-or-treating?
Cackle Street in England and Cannibal Road in California. Which way are you heading? I'll see you.
Welcome, Dr. Lucille Marr, Professor of Church History at McGill. I'm interested. Before the arrival of the Europeans, what was the belief system in place for the Amerindian?
Well, a good descriptive word would be harmony. They believed that everything connected together, nature, humans, the spiritual forces, and the animal life, and were very, very careful to keep all that in place. A circle was a good symbol that they used for their festivals, for their dances, for their rituals. Their harvest festival was a beautiful circle dance.
Wow, that's very nice. So again, so the French arrived. Do the beliefs conflict, collide, or are they somehow or other embraceable?
When the French first arrived, the Aboriginal people didn't know of them and saw these sails coming in the distance and thought there may be some kind of supernatural beings arriving, and didn't understand why they drank blood, wine, and ate wood. Their bread, their hardtack was so hard. As far as the spiritual belief systems, their belief was founded on a dualism, which was very different than the harmony that Aboriginal belief system was based on. And it was really difficult for them to understand how everything could be working together, and particularly the roles of men and women. Women had a very integral place in Aboriginal spirituality and life. For instance, they were the ones that picked the political leaders. The chiefs were always men, but they were always chosen by the older women, the elder women. And if a chief did something out of order, then he would be kicked out and the older women would pick someone else. So it was very ordered, but very much complementary, working together. And for the missionaries, the Jesuits in particular, they hated the women because they had such a voice, and actually had loud voices, talked a lot, and had opinions, and there's some really kind of rants in the Jesuit relations about women and their role.
So we jump ahead now. When the British conquest, how would that have affected the system that was in place?
The truth is that France did not want this colony anymore. Voltaire once wrote, "What's all this fighting over a few acres of snow?"
Right.
Most of the French didn't want to come here to live. They came for the fur trade or for souls. So when the British ended up inheriting it, quite literally in a much bigger war, trading a couple of Caribbean sugar islands for this colony.
That's right.
They had to figure out how to make the colony British without making it English and Protestant. So it was the first time ever under British rule that Catholicism and the French language were given the force of law. And some scholars believe that the American Revolution actually finally broke out in reaction to the way that the British were governing the French colony.
Now this begs the question, then how do other religions find a place in basically a Christian society?
Well, right from the time of the conquest, there were Jewish merchants in Quebec, in Montreal, and they actually had synagogues, held their worship, practiced their cultural rituals. And at the time of the 19th century, with immigrant movements and so on, there was quite a large Jewish community that developed. Other faiths, like the Muslims, for instance, and Buddhists and Hindus and Sikhs, also came in the late 19th century.
Now, just briefly, your feeling today, are churches being built or are they being torn down?
I don't know that churches are being torn down as much as reimagined, used for other things. So there isn't really in Montreal much of a building going on in terms of churches, but rethinking and reusing how churches are being used.
You know, by the way, I used to be an altar boy.
Michael, I find that a little bit difficult to believe.
Do you think the powers that be would let me sit here with a goofy expression on my face if I was lying? This is the former Shaughnessy Mansion, built in 1874. In 1989, it was converted into the Canadian Centre of Architecture, a wonderful celebration of all things architectural. Fun fact, across Rene Levesque is a ghost-like reflection of the mansion. This sculpture garden is a full-scale deconstruction of the Shaughnessy Mansion, specifically its original foundation. The floating fixtures and furniture items tease our imaginations into reconstructing the rest of the house, turning us all into architects. But I think something even more remarkable is happening in this holographic space. Like stepping into a painting, entering this open-air museum transforms visitors into art pieces themselves. When Colburn Street became Peel, a few feathers were ruffled. When St. Gabriel morphed into Ottawa Street, not all the citizens had national pride about that. Truth is, not everyone's happy when a street changes its name. For instance, the transition from Dorchester Boulevard to Rene Levesque produced some real sparks in the English community.
Actually, what sparked discussion was the Quebec law passed in the 1970s mandating that all signage be in French.
I'm playing hooky, don't tell Miss Kaylee.
But when it came to Dorchester, many English politicians simply disagreed with the street choice. They argued that it was wrong to name such a cold, hard business street after a warm, personable man like the Premier. They felt the government should have selected a more charming road, one filled with strolling citizens and spiral staircases.
About that Quebec law, what does that mean?
It means officially that we aren't sitting on Dorchester Street or Rene Levesque Boulevard, but Boulevard Rene Levesque.
Miss Kaylee might not remember, but I actually got an A in her French class.
See?
Si. Oui. Since 1925, this building just off Rene Levesque has been a parking garage. Before that, it was a natural rink, meaning to be able to skate, the air outside had to be cold enough to freeze the ice inside. Despite this charming drawback, the Victoria Rink was destined for greatness. Not only did it become Canada's first electrified building, but, hold on to your toques, hockey fans, the very first Stanley Cup game ever played anywhere was right here. Fun fact, do you know why the official dimensions of every NHL ice surface on the planet are 200 feet by 80 feet? Simple Montreal geography, because that's the difference between Stanley Street and Drummond Street, the two streets that bookend this parking garage. Parking garage. I'm talking about a shrine to hockey. And if you need it explained to you, drop your gloves and I'll explain it to your nose. Built in 1862, the Victoria skating rink was an instant success, filled with skaters in the winter and concerts in the summer. Skating was described as the grand Montrealese pastime, and so with winter sleighs waiting outside, the children came to skate. Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, even dignified military officers executing quadrilles, waltzes, and labyrinths. You could watch from the 10-foot wide promenade surrounding the boardless rink, or even a royal box if you were a visiting dignitary. Now that you've imagined the moving panorama of fancy dress balls on ice skates, imagine the world's first bench-clearing brawl. When did that happen? During the first organized game of modern ice hockey ever played, of course. 2 teams, goaltenders, a referee, and a wooden puck to protect bystanders from injury for 60 minutes. All firsts. All at Montreal's very own Victoria Rink in 1875. Hey, it even got a write-up in the Montreal Gazette. Opening its doors in 1958, I guess we could call the Queen Elizabeth Hotel the new kid on this block. The largest hotel in Montreal, Elizabeth the Queen has herself been a guest, as have princes, princesses, prime ministers, and presidents, and everyone from the Dalai Lama to Fidel Castro. But perhaps the most legendary guest was John Lennon of the Beatles. In 1969, he staged his famous bed-in room 1742 and wrote the hit song, Give Peace a Chance. The hotel estimates it's welcomed over 22 million guests in its relatively short lifetime. Oh, and when it was built, it was the only hotel in the world to offer air conditioning and electronically controlled heating. Rene Levesque Boulevard was a long and winding road, but nothing compared to our next street. So pack a big lunch. We're going on a hike. Oh.
Saint Laurent because I think it characterizes Montreal fully.
My favorite street is Green Avenue.
I guess I'm gonna say Sherbrooke West in NDG.
Monkland, exactly where I stand, right here.
Would probably be Saint Denis Street.
My favorite street is Saint-Viateur because you can do everything on it. You don't have to leave it.
The first one that came in my mind is Saint Catherine.
My favorite street is Notre-Dame. It's really close to the Lachine Canal in Atwater Market where we are right now.
My favorite street is La Commune.